Well, let's start off by talking a little bit about your early history because you came from the House to the Senate.
That's right.
Back in those days, what did you notice was the biggest difference between being in the House and being in the Senate?
Well, I think the most important thing is the personal relationships you develop um, along the way. In the Senate, you don't really have as much of an opportunity to create those personal moments with fellow members. I mean, you're not there's a little bit more distance, I think, between or among senators than there are among House members, and you're kind of all. It's almost like a college class in the House. They're younger members. Thrown together, and it's not as reverent and it's not as probably as just revered in sort of an institutional sense. But there are big differences. You have a huge staff in the Senate. In the House, you're limited to 16, 18 people. I think I had 125 staff at the end of my Senate career. So there's just a huge difference in resources and kind of the sense of camaraderie that comes in the House versus the Senate.
Well, I'm going to want to ask about the relations between the House and the Senate as we go on. But you really were there in one of the more extraordinary times in our history for many, many reasons. So let's talk first about the tight margins that existed the whole time you were in leadership. You went from being, I was counting back, minority leader to majority leader briefly, to minority leader to majority leader to minority leader, which was a reflection of the times. You wound up making, at one point with the historic 50-50 Senate, a power sharing arrangement with your counterpart, Trent Lott. How did that work out? How was that as a way of governing?
Well, just to clarify, I think it's fair to say that I ran for majority leader in '94, and we narrowly lost the majority, and so I ended up, even though I ran for majority leader, being the minority leader because of the narrow loss in '94, and then from '94 to 2000, I was the minority leader. 2001, I became the majority leader, and then went back to being the minority leader in 2002. So your point is well taken. And in all that time, we were a couple of votes, one way or the other, either in the majority or in the minority. And at a point in 2000, Senator Lott and I actually had to negotiate how one governs with a 50-50 Senate. That's never happened before. And so we actually had to work out what we called a power sharing agreement, sharing responsibility, sharing power. We even had notions of changing chairs halfway through the Congress and trying to figure out just how do you govern when it's exactly 50-50. And we worked it out, and I give him credit for working with us to try to accomplish something that had never occurred before.
Was that, in retrospect, that forced you've got to get along together and play nice situation? Was that perhaps better in terms of actually accomplishing anything in the Senate, or was the reverse true? Did it just create a stalemate?
Well, it depends on the circumstances. I think it was really a tribute to both caucuses that, in spite of all the turbulence and in spite of the difficulties that came with the presidential election of 2000, and then this 50-50 Senate of 2000, that we were able to work through how we were going to govern and how we were going to actually try to make the institution work in spite of the fact that there was no majority. We did that, and then in September of 2001, just 9 months into that working relationship, two things happened. One of the Republicans crossed over and became an independent, and that shifted the balance, 51-49. And then, of course, 9/11 occurred. And in that time frame from 9/11 to about 11/11, 2 months, it was an amazing machine. We just pumped out legislation. We worked very, very closely together, seemingly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We were just pouring it on and doing a lot of things that in retrospect maybe we acted too quickly on. But nonetheless, it showed what one could do in spite of the fact that you had a very, very narrow majority. It was an incredibly intense but intriguing time, and it was an amazing thing to be a part of.
I guess when I was thinking of you having been for a month majority leader back in that sequence, I was thinking of the 2000 election, which was this historically contested election where Al Gore, the vice president, at the moment was briefly the tie-breaking vote. Although I guess that was actually a lame duck Senate. But I was always curious about how the Democratic senators reacted to that contested election, because the election that was resolved where Gore won the popular vote, but President Bush won the electoral vote as a result of the recount in Florida. Democratic activists around the country were enraged. The Democratic senators seemed resigned, not enraged, and did not protest when they voted to confirm the outcome of the election finally after the recount in the House. What was the mood then? What was the feeling inside the caucus at that time?
Oh, Linda, that's such a good question, because it was really a time of incredible uncertainty and turbulence. Newt Gingrich and I just had a debate in front of the Supreme Court a couple weeks ago, when he was arguing that we really ought to take another look at judicial review, and maybe we shouldn't abide by what the Supreme Court decides as its interpretation of law from time to time if there is sentiment against it. And my argument was, what if Al Gore had said, I'm not going to accept the Supreme Court decision. It was a 5-4 decision, politically motivated. I'm not going to accept it. For the life of me, I can't imagine what would have happened to the country had he made that decision. We talked quite a bit during that time, and I know he was under incredible pressure to do exactly that, to say we're going to stick this out, we're going to see if we can resolve it in some other way, take it to the House of Representatives if we have to, but we're going to do that. He didn't, and I remember so vividly his call where he told me he had decided to accept the decision and he's going to announce it to the country.
How'd you react to that?
Well, I had mixed reaction, frankly, because I was caught up in it myself. I felt very, very troubled by it, but I admired him immensely for having come to that decision. And looking back, I'm confident he made the right decision, even though it was so painful for many of us at that moment. But when he made that decision, I felt we owed our allegiance to him and to the country institutionally, and so we chose not to fight it. And we were, of course, criticized and even ostracized by some, but I felt it was what we had to do, and we had to move on. We had to start governing. We had to respect the institutions of this republic, and that's basically what we decided to do.
Do you think the Supreme Court decision was politically motivated?
I don't know. I don't know that anyone will ever ultimately come to any definitive conclusion. I have my suspicions, but obviously that's a choice that was made. We have to respect it.
So in that time, just to finish that point off about that period of time, you were divided 50-50, and you were both sides, both parties, trying to woo people from the other party to come over so that one of you would have the majority. And ultimately, you did succeed in Jim Jeffords, the Republican from Vermont, did cross over and become an independent, which gave you the majority. You were talking, at least at the staff level, to John McCain in those days. How interested do you think he was in becoming a Democrat? Do you think he seriously considered it?
I do. It was more than, we were talking to John personally and very directly and privately on several occasions, and we thought at one point that he would be the more likely of the three people. We were also talking to Lincoln Chafee and Jim Jeffords, of course, and so Jim kind of surprised us one day when he called and asked if we'd meet him secretly at 6 o'clock in the morning in his hideaway to discuss how we might do this. We had open lines and quite a bit of communication with the other two. John McCain was very angry at George Bush for the way he was treated in the primary campaigns, and his anger and his frustration with the Bush political machine was a big motivation. We talked a lot about his conservative views on abortion and on some of the social issues and how much of an impediment that would be. But he was very, very interested for a while, and it was an interesting series of discussions and conversations with him.
So you think he came close to switching parties?
I think so.
Even though there was a philosophical disagreement. And do you think that it was because of the way he was treated in the primary by the Bush people, or do you think that there was a certain comfort level with the Democrats that would be sufficient for him to cross over? Did he communicate that to you?
Well, John worked well with us. I mean, there were so many occasions when we would work on legislation together. He would look for a prominent Democrat to work with on a number of things, whether it was campaign reform or now it's climate change. But over the years, it was commonly understood that if you wanted a Republican partner, John was one of the people you could oftentimes talk to. We all had a good friendship with him. So it transcended politics. He is truly somebody who can work both sides of the aisle and has great friends and relationships with people on both sides. And so the personal relationships, I think, created the environment where you could actually talk about doing something professionally or politically. Then add to that the frustration that he had, especially towards Bush in that first year following the presidential election. And you had the right mix for at least the possibility of serious negotiations.